Recording in All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of School of Speech presented by SpeechTherapyPD, the podcast for all of us school-based SLPs. I'm your host, Carolyn Dolby, and I am so glad you are here. Today's conversation is one that is especially close to my heart because we are talking about my favorite topic, school-based feeding and swallowing. This episode is titled More Than Lunch: How SLPs and OTs Can Transform School Mealtimes. When we think about feeding and swallowing in the schools, it can be really easy for us just to focus on the food, or just focusing on the safe swallow, or just focusing on the lunch itself. But school mealtimes are so much more. They're about safety, communication, independence, sensory needs, social connection, inclusion, dignity. Oh my gosh, about the student's ability to meaningfully participate in their school day. And supporting all of that takes collaboration. And today we are going to be looking specifically how SLPs and OTs can work together to create safer, more inclusive, and more meaningful mealtimes for our students. I am so excited for our two guests today. Okay, first of all, I'm going to introduce Margaryta. She really, if you've been listening to School of Speech, she is going to be a returning guest, and you're going to be like, I remember Margaryta. So I am so excited. She is not only a colleague, she's also my friend, and she's one of my favorite collaborators in all things feeding and swallowing. We've presented together, we've taught together, we've developed resources together, and we've spent more hours than I could possibly count talking about how we can improve feeding and swallowing services for students in the schools. Margaryta Kuzmin is, let me just tell you about how wonderful she is. She is an award-winning bilingual pediatric speech language pathologist with more than 15 years supporting children and families in school-based and early intervention settings. She is the founder of Kuzmin SLP, an ASHA-approved continuing education provider, and is nationally and internationally recognized presenter, professional educator, published author, and advocate for collaborative family-centered participation-based care. And joining Margaryta is another one of my friends. Woohoo! Dr. Lily Glasgo. Gosh, did I say that right? Oh gosh. Listen to me, friend. That's me. Well, Lily, we met about a year ago. So much fun. She's an occupational therapist. She's a researcher. She's an educator and co-owner of The Feeding Link. Lily received her PhD in occupational science from UNC Chapel Hill, and her work examines pediatric feeding through an occupational, interdisciplinary, and systems level lens. She is currently involved in research with Feeding Matters, focused on early identification of pediatric feeding disorder, and is also working on a fascinating project examining feeding policies in school districts across the United States. Margaryta and Lily, welcome to School of Speech.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to always be here. Thank you for having us.
Oh my gosh, thank
Yes,
you so
super
much.
exciting. Thank you.
Not only did Lily and I meet last year, we just found out that we're actually physically neighbors. I'm just loving everything about this. And Margaryta and I just met up in her home state, New York, just about a month ago. So you guys, this podcast is so fun. All right, y'all, as we settle in, I have a little bit of housekeeping. Every episode of School of Speech is offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs through your Speech Therapy PD account because learning should count. And if you are joining us live, and I see a lot of returning lives and some new live listeners, welcome, welcome. If your state requires live CEUs, please make sure to complete all modules, including complete course, before the end of today. And of course, we want your questions. Feeding and swallowing always generates some really great discussions, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. And just in case our discussion runs a little bit beyond that 60-minute mark, I just wanted to go first up. If you need to hop off after 60 minutes, no worries, you will still get credit for today's course. Of course, we hope that you'll stick around because we never know what gems might come out in the overtime. Um, Okay, so we will be, I'll be moderating the chat for those questions. And so I always like to I like everybody listening live to jump in the chat, let us know where you're at. I see a lot of familiars, so I want to say hi to you. So jump in there in the chat, let me say hi, live listeners, and where you're at. And I'm just going to go through our disclosures, and then we'll be getting on with the show. For me, I'm a salaried employee of Portland Public Schools in Portland, Oregon, and I receive compensation from Speech Therapy PD for hosting School of Speech. I'm a member of ASHA and I volunteer for Feeding Matters. Margaryta is an employee of the New York City Department of Education, and she has some amazing non-financial relationships, including Feeding Matters. With me, she's on the Shannon Goldwater Summit for Change Committee, the International Associations of Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Special Topics Committee, and membership of the American Board of Swallowing and Swallowing Disorders. Lily is a full-time faculty member at Pacific University, where she teaches pediatric content. She also receives compensation through her business, The Feeding Link. You're all going to want to go check that out, where she provides consultations and trainings to professionals regarding school feeding practices. And she also is impressive with her non-financial relationships, including serving as a volunteer researcher for Feeding Matters. Oh, all three of us, look at that. And as a volunteer board member of the Oregon Occupational Therapy Association. Oh, you guys are in good hands today. All right. Well, welcome everybody to School of Speech. Let's get into some feeding and swallowing. All right. All right, Margaryta and Lily, even though I know you guys, before we get into roles, policies, all the complicated pieces, I would love if you wouldn't mind starting off with giving us a little bit of background for our listeners. How did you each find your way into pediatric feeding and swallowing, and specifically into the work of feeding in the schools? And maybe your cute meet cute, whatever that thing is.
Lily, you want to start?
Sure, will do. Hi, everyone. It is super nice to be on today. Super lovely to see my friends. So I finished my OT program. I'm a OT graduate from 2018. And then I did a pediatric fellowship. So in occupational therapy, we have very specific fellowships that are postgraduate, heavily mentored opportunities. I did one that brought me from South Carolina all the way to Portland, Oregon, where I experienced so much strong therapy, early support. So I was really trained in an interdisciplinary clinic in feeding and then in some other rotations as well. After I finished my fellowship year, I took a position with the local school district, education service district, where I was half-time seeing kids for OT that had complex medical needs from kindergarten to 21. And half-time I was the OT for our feeding team. The OT role on that feeding team was so interesting to me, and it immediately took all of my attention and interest. We started serving, we pushed it past 100 that first year of students across different districts and counties. And the next year I was the feeding team lead, and which is also unusual for an OT to be a feeding team lead, which is how I met Elisa Thurman, who's now my business partner. So loved school feeding. It was a phenomenal experience. Did that for a bit. And then I moved to UNC Chapel Hill to pursue my PhD, to learn more about how in the world do some districts like mine have these really robust feeding supports, and then other districts don't do anything, it seems. I was very confused about the wild west nature of school feeding. So that's what I really worked on during my PhD. I focused a lot on how policies work, how OT services and policies interact. And then I did my dissertation on looking at school meal policies during COVID. And it was beautiful. I really enjoyed that time. And now got hired back in Portland. So we moved cross country again. And now I'm the pediatric faculty at Pacific University, which has been a phenomenal work experience for me.
I am so glad you're back in Portland.
Me too. Me
Thanks
too.
for sharing. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And Margaryta, after you tell all your accolades, you got to share how we met and got to know each other.
So hi, everyone. For those who know me or for those who do not, my name is Margaryta Kuzmin. I am New York City school-based SLP. And my story is quite different, but some similarities. In grad school, I took dysphagia course. It was only adults. Okay, we maybe had one day where we talked about pediatrics, but the anatomy and physiology and neuroanatomy was really, really something that I was drawn into. I just really loved how everything is working together, and I knew at that time that I'm going to be working in a hospital or a rehab center with adults. I was very sure of that. And if you told me that, Margaryta, you're going to end up in the school, I would be laughing at you. So, but life, God has its own plans for you. And I ended up in a school, and the school that I ended up is a special education school that serves very medically complex children. And with my knowledge of feeding and swallowing, but mostly for adults, what I did see is the complete lack of talking, addressing, feeding and swallowing for children who obviously, without even being a feeding specialist, you could see that they were struggling with feeding and swallowing. The first thing that really struck me was a paraprofessional who was feeding a child with cerebral palsy in a wheelchair in a fully reclined position and shoving the food into the child. And I said, well, wait a minute, if this child already has motor difficulties on managing the food, how are we putting this child in a reclining position where the food is kind of going, the gravity works against this child right now? And this is where I spoke to my administrator and I said, can I please do a safety meeting with the feeding personnel so we could just discuss some of those things. And a cool activity that we did during that little feeding meetup was I gave them all a cookie and I told them to recline in their chair and try to chew and swallow it. And let me tell you, how many people coughed during that time. So that was like a really good, so that was my little door towards building the trust with administrators and also understanding that I can help a little bit. And then of course, because I was seeking the knowledge, I started taking a lot of courses that only talked about pediatric feeding disorders. And I just kind of like start learning more and more and more and more and so forth. And now I'm in my school. I am the lead SLP, as we would call it. I'm the person to call with the feeding and swallowing issues. All my SLP colleagues, they run to me, even if the child is not on my caseload. I will never say no to help someone addressing pediatric feeding disorders within the school. And I advocate for these kids and I talk to parents about it. I have workshops that I do for parents. I talk to administration about it. And I made slowly, didn't happen over time, but slowly I made myself this person that people can reach out to in case if they needed help and support. So, and that's kind of like where I am today. But I'm also very passionate about early intervention because I feel like if we can tackle some of the issues early on, we might have to tackle less when these kids get to school ages. So that's just
Agreed.
a little bit of, yes, I know. I'm getting, you know how it is. You get really, really passionate and
Oh, yeah.
it's a big deal when you truly live your passion. And I feel like all three of us, this is what we truly share, is that
Yeah,
we truly, three of us are super passionate about supporting these children in the schools.
absolutely. I love it. All right, what's your meet cute?
All right. We met through a Feeding Matters
Oh,
conference. I don't remember. I think Margaryta, you emailed me.
Yes. So I watched
Yeah.
your presentation and I'm like, oh my God, this girl talks my language. I have to reach out to her and just say that I truly enjoyed her presentation and how she delivered all the policies. And it was just, again, it's so good to meet and talk to people and also become friends with them as the time goes on with people that share the same passion with you. So I am so grateful for both of you that you guys are in my life. Super
Yeah.
grateful.
Oh,
Feeding
absolutely. And
Matters really brings people together. And then I was in New York kind of after the conference, and we were able to meet in person. And now we've written together and are now engaged in a full-on research project together about school feeding policies. So it's been so fruitful. My tip of advice, my word of advice is just cold email people. This is how
mhm,
I've developed so many relationships in my professional world that have turned into real friendships. It's
I
really important.
agree. I've had listeners actually reach out to me, and we've talked on the phone. We've had a Zoom call. I
Yep,
love it. Margarita and I met in line at ASHA during the SIG
13.
13 feeding and swallowing dysphagia special interest group, and we just struck up a conversation, and boom, now look at all that we're doing.
Yep.
Um,
exactly.
Anyway, thank you guys. I love hearing how people got into their work. I just think it's really, really interesting. So, y'all, let's get down to business. Let's get down. All right, Margarita, you're up.
Yeah.
When we are talking about pediatric feeding disorders in the schools, what does that look like during a student's school day? Like, this is what you do all
Yeah.
day, every day. What does that look like?
So overall, I could tell you what it looks like for me and what I
Mhm.
realized by studying this and studying what other people are doing. It looks a little bit different depending on the state, depending on the schools, the districts, and so forth. But I can share what I'm doing, which I shared a little bit of some of the trainings that I provide, which I think is really essential in case if you are from the school that has a very strong opinion about not doing feeding therapy per se. What you could do is to start doing some of the trainings, which would they always look at. They always want the either staff trainings or parent trainings about
Mhm.
this topic, because you can bring a lot of different examples and talk about development and talk about a lot of areas that could bring the action into the classrooms without the feeding therapy per se, if that makes sense. So that's like a really good. So this is something that I do yearly. So I have one parent workshop on pediatric feeding disorders and guiding parents through some of the sensory components and also some of the motor components for some of our students. And for some students, it might be both. But I also, because I have established myself within my organization in my school, I do feeding therapy hands-on where we work on safety. For example, I have a child right now with a very rare disorder, and he loves to eat, which is fantastic, right? We want all our kids to enjoy eating and participation and participate during meal times, but he overstuffs like he overstuffs his mouth to the point where he would start coughing or gagging. So some of the parts that I work on is to create what can help him when I'm not there in the classroom when he eats. So sometimes I'll do a little bit of the feeding therapy along with him just to figure out what can help him. So we do visual cues, verbal cues, and so forth, and pacing and
Mhm.
chewing and swallowing before the next bite, and kind of getting into this routine of him practicing where he's safely, right? He's safely eating within our schools because we definitely don't want any choking episodes on our time in school. So that what can it look like? I had another child who would only eat one thing. I
Mhm.
would say two things. And then he would also throw up in the school, and nobody could understand why. And nobody was questioning other than, they would put a little note, today he threw up, today he threw up, today he threw up. So the little thing that he did eat, he would still vomit it. And so I'm like, so what is this kid really getting during his school day? So, and of course, it also affected how he participated in the school. He was always looking very sad and sleepy, and he just didn't look that he wanted to do anything. Honestly, he would just lay down on the beanbag, and it looked really sad. So I had to do a little bit digging, and I got the mom on board, and we contacted a nutritionist and gastroenterologist, and mom did take this child, and he happened to have very bad. He was lactose intolerant, and the cheese
Oh.
puffs that he was eating, which was very limited already because he only had like few foods that he was eating. That's the reason why his body was reacting. So as we removed the one one of the little things that he already was eating, he felt better, and we started working on increasing his they also gave him a hunger stimulant to help him to feel a little bit more hungry so he would eat more. He started to gain weight. He started to come to school. He started to attend. So this is here's an example of how it's so academically relevant for us to tackle it within the school, because we are the ones who are observing this, to get sometimes medical professionals involved and collaborate with them. So yes, so that's kind of like what I do on a daily basis. And of course, the collaboration with the OTs is so, so important, because I only see a child sometimes twice to three times a week. So it's cool to get an OT to help you out a little bit, so then maybe the other 2 days when I don't see the child, you can actually have him on your caseload and help me to carry some of those skills to the point of where we can just let the teachers or paraprofessionals carry that on. And this is where the feeding therapy direct services can go into indirect services. And this is something that Carolyn and I talked a lot about in our master courses. There's a different ways to deliver some of the services.
Yeah, those listening, we Margarita and I did a master course on interventions of pediatric feeding disorder and dysphagia in the schools. I'll try to, you know what? I'll try to link it in the chat in a minute. But anyway, well, that is such a nice little segue into, hey, Lily, if we're looking at the same types of students, you know, we get all these students in our schools. Um, let's take a look at what does it look like through the occupational therapy lens that you might notice that maybe an SLP or other members of the team don't immediately recognize? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some kind of obvious ones that I do think SLPs these days are really attuned to, but I'll mention them anyway. The positioning, yeah, the recline seating, the slouching, all of those types of things. We're trained heavily in OT to really look at body positioning and create some modifications that can really support the ergonomics of the child in the school. There's also, with that, the inclusion element. So how can we make the seat as typical as possible or as supportive as possible
Thank
without
you.
drawing a ton of attention? I think from the OT lens, we're really wanting to provide those services in a natural environment, in a holistic way. So maybe that means that we help the student identify easier to chew things at the mealtime in their cafeteria, or we help staff support identifying those easier to chew things so that the sensory elements, the difficulty sitting in the table and chairs, all of these things aren't excluding the kid from school. So I think we're looking at the large environment of the cafeteria. We're looking at the busyness. We're thinking about, would this child benefit from headphones or preferential seating or going into the cafeteria a couple minutes early or a couple minutes later, depending on the needs. So occupational therapy is all about the whole occupational analysis, right? We're looking at it from start to finish. And then also, how does that impact their time in PE later? Or how does that impact their literacy development before or after a meal if they haven't been able to participate and haven't been able to get a full meal? So the OT and SLP, we really work closely together. One kind of example I'd say is that we had a group of kids that were in a pulled out um, school classroom that didn't get any opportunities to go into the full school cafeteria. And we were just told that's how it is. It's easier for all of their paraprofessionals to be in this small room. It's quieter, it's calmer. And then I was like really looking at it and I was like, well, why are we putting these middle schoolers on these baby tables in the tiny little room? We can change things. So we got them, like my role, I spent so long literally just writing the funding for getting a table and chairs that actually fit them and their equipment into the cafeteria. And like one of the kids hadn't eaten in school more than like crackers for years, and he started having full meals. He didn't have any oral motor problems. He needed the stimulation. He needed the people around him eating. And it was like, wow, once we can model in a really nice, conducive way, and he had his friends with him and his equipment and his support people, it was like, oh, now you're participating and having a good time and actually enjoying lunch. So in the grand scheme of things, it was like it just needed to be a table. It didn't have to actually be that much. It just needed to be a table that was in a public environment, and there you go.
I know that it seems easy for us because we see it. And I'm sure our listeners are like, well, that's easy. But I know that it's not. I do know it's not. But I do want to, Lily, what I love, one of the things what I loved you hearing you say, because this is really a big thing with me, is that you're looking for adaptive equipment or seating or whatever it is that you're doing to be as typical as possible. And that is so important for me as well. I really do a lot of training on the dignity of meal times
Yeah.
and the dignity of the students. And when you were talking about the table, I was also thinking about like a sippy cup. When
Yeah.
a middle schooler is still drinking out of a children's sippy cup, there's some easy ways that we can still have a lidded cup, but it not be it just that stigma of what it looks like. So,
It's
well,
so real.
it is real. So I'm hearing like the SLP lens and the OT lens, and I think maybe one of the biggest problems schools, my teams have is like, how do we know what roles occupational therapy have, and what's the role? Is there a different role that SLPs have? Where do we overlap? You know what? This question's for both of you. For all y'all. When supporting with students with feeding and swallowing needs, can we talk a little bit about like what is each other's roles? Or is it collaborative? I don't know. Go for it.
Yeah, I'll start and throw some things out there. I think that, in my opinion, feeding really can be an interdisciplinary, verging on transdisciplinary
Love it.
practice.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't love the idea that we have to stick super hard in our lanes. I think it falls a lot more on experience, continuing education,
Mhm.
asking for support, and your individual journey as a therapist a little bit more than the technical, are you an SLP or an OT? I've also seen many PTs that have worked beautifully within school feeding alongside me because they were interested and they believe it, and they also know where they don't know and they know the gaps. So that's where I think like this is less about role differentiation and a little bit more about some of the models in healthcare that are true collaborative care.
I love your words.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that. Margarita?
And I really love when you said just asking for help, because that's what happened to my OT in my school. Now, she wasn't as passionate about feeding as you are, Lily, and she didn't really have much of experience, but I just sat her next to a child and I said, this is what I'm doing with him. And so at that time, it was a child with a no-no disorder, also a very rare disorder. The child
Mhm.
was not walking, had a lot of motor issues, including self-feeding skills. The child was on the bottle at 9 years old. The swallowing skills were great as he was tilting the bottle with a huge hole in it and swallowing just fine. It's the motor skills, like oral motor skills, that were really delayed. And I was like, I gotta get this kid on like a different diet, maybe purees, maybe your soft salads. But again, for 9 years, this child has been feeding this way. It's hard to turn back on this habit, number one, and
Right.
development that has happened. It took us 2.5 years to transition to a puree where he was sitting and scooping independently the food in front of him. So what I did was I said, well, you are so good, right? Your field is so good with the whole coordination of the hand to the mouth, holding on the spoon. She had to do adaptive wrapping around the spoon so it's a little bit easier for him to grasp on it. Like, so she did all that part. And I said, but when he takes the spoon in his mouth, can you do this? Can you just do this? Right? So even though she was not experienced in what is it that we need to do when the food finally gets in, or again, maybe she was never questioning that. I said, but look, it's really simple. It's just, can you do this? Right? Just to improve that lip seal on the spoon. And after 2.5 years, as he graduated into the middle school, the child was sitting by himself. Also, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, he gained weight and started
Mm.
walking.
What?
Yes, 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 he did. But for me, obviously this is really important. But for me, looking at him sitting at a table versus him laying with a bottle and independently scooping the food was just so important that he was moving on to the middle school. And if I didn't have this OT who just jumped with me and just because I asked her for this help and I made it very simple for her, um, she is so happy that she was a part of this change. And I think that is a big deal that you said that, because sometimes we feel it's collaboration. It's, we sit at the round table and we discuss this, but sometimes it's just like, hey, look what I'm doing. Look, you see it's working. Can you do the same thing? And that's what is transdisciplinary mean. It's how we teach in each other. And that's how I knew the whole hand-mouth coordination, how you have to rotate the wrist. I would
Mm.
never think about that because to me, I'm thinking about what's happening in the mouth, how the tongue is moving. But learning from OT, you get so much more information. And then, of course, sharing the things that you do know. And it becomes so beautiful. And let me tell you guys, we barely spoke to each other. Like, I just showed her and then I did my session, she did hers. And then once in a while, I would pop into the room for paraprofessionals and things like that. So he practiced eating a lot. But that is what the key is. Just ask. And sometimes the paras will say no, or they will look at you like you have three heads. And I know that. I'm in school, guys. I know all the roadblocks. I see them within my school, even with me being so proactive with feeding and swallowing. But there will be people in your school that will jump in with you and work with you. So stick to those people. And I
And
think,
yeah, I was sorry, but one
yeah,
thing that you said really hit with me when you said that it took you 2.5 years, right? So this is how you reframe that when you're talking to that para, that yes, this is going to be this is going to be slow going.
yeah.
However, do you want him in 2.5 years to still be on the bottle, or do you want him to be eating? Where at whatever texture that might be, and in any way that he might be in 2.5 years. I mean,
I
because
know
two and
that
a half years are going to go
it
by.
seems like a very rational answer to that, but let me tell you, giving this child a bottle was easier because you just give a bottle and you walk away. Now I'm asking you to scoop a spoon and guide it to this child's mouth, and he might not want it, and he didn't want it initially. And it's very, very slow. It was like, can you please give him one spoon before the bottle? It was like I was to the point also, I have to also make sure that you guys also understand that the parent initially was not on board. Now, she gave me full permission to do it in the school. She knew I'm working because I saw the potential in this kid. And I said, I really want to work on this. And I said, can you do it at home? And she goes like, no, we're both working parents. He is seen by grandma. When he comes home, the grandma doesn't have energy. She just gives him the bottle. And that's what it is. Now, COVID happened and we did remote sessions. And I just kept on showing her like different videos before COVID. I sent her like little videos. And then when we finally, I see her at home, she's at home. I was like, can you just please open anything? Like, can you get like yogurt in your fridge? And can you give him 1 spoon right now? Just do it right now before the feeding. And then slowly, as she saw the child improving, now I got the parent on board, but it took a little time. And so that question that you asked, Carolyn, was no, he doesn't. The parent doesn't want to do that. It's more work, but it's kind of like that. Can you just do just 1 spoon?
Yeah.
Just please keep it the same container. You don't have to move a new container, same container for a week. Put it in the fridge, 1 spoon or whatever the food comes in from the lunch, 1 spoon, throw it out. The rest is a bottle, 1 spoon. And then we got to 2 spoons. And until we got rid of the bottle completely. And he was eating everything. He was eating puree pizza. He was eating puree hamburger. He was yep. I know it doesn't sound maybe tasty to us, but you know what? I don't care.
No, I've eaten everything pureed.
He got his nutrition. He loved it. And most importantly, as you talked about dignity, like how cool is that I was a part of that change for the rest of his life now. Right. And now I passed on everything to the speech therapist who is taking him in the middle school. I found her, obviously, guys, because, I this is how I do it. And I have a little baggie with all his stuff, his spoon. And I actually showed her videos of us doing things, and I called her and I emailed her. I think it kind of died with that, which I understand that this is what happens in the school sometimes, that it's not a part, or it's been difficult to do feeding therapy or addressing feeding skills in the schools for SLPs. We want it inside at our hearts. We wanted to do it, but we feel hesitant for multiple reasons. But I'm just still happy, even if this is the only thing that he was able to learn and not be able to move on with the textures and so forth. I'm still very, very proud of the work that I did. So I think this is really important. So I'm so grateful, Lily, that you said about the help, because that's exactly what I did.
And it's amazing. And I think one thing I do is I'm careful not to say feeding therapy, because that's a trigger for a lot of districts in a lot of different areas. So I just say safe, I'll say I work on their safe eating protocol, and I add it to their safe eating protocol and training. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know that there's a lot of districts that say we do not do feeding therapy. Feeding therapy is a clinic-based curriculum where the parent da. Got it. So if that's the district you're in, just say that we are making sure that we are providing supports and interventions for all students that require feeding and swallowing support in order to maintain safety, efficiency, foster socialization, and have meaningful participation. Which brings us to the next question I wanted to have you guys talk about, and that is, why is feeding and swallowing an educational issue? Because we have some districts saying we don't do feeding therapy because that's a clinic model. So let's talk about how it is an educational issue, because I know that if I hear "isn't feeding medical" one more time, I might just cry. Well, I actually have cried about it, but
yeah, it's a very interesting topic. This was a heavy component of my development during my PhD, was trying to understand how educationally relevant feeding is and how to articulate that. When you read IDEA, which we should be treating as very crucial for our professions and sticking with the policies that IDEA provides, educational relevance, that's not a real thing. The IDEA talks about providing services for appropriate public education for all students. And that looks like independent living skills. It looks like academics. It looks like participation in lunch, recess, pickup, drop off. It looks like self-management skills. So I think culturally in schools, the term educationally relevant and academically relevant is really pushed because it's part of the vernacular, but there's not a super solid basis to that. And really, IDEA is clear that it's about all of these things are educational. So I have explained it a lot in the way of like toileting. We agree that OTs, BCBAs, teachers, therapists of all sorts are working on toileting in schools. It's important um, for their independent living skills as well as accessing the rest of their school day. Feeding is very similar, and I would say significantly more meaningful for a lot of children. Yes, it's both this, it opens up the door so that they can participate and they have a strong nutritional foundation for paying attention in class, but it also, in and of itself, is an independent living skill that is covered by school. So it's kind of a funny question. And when I hear admin still push back on this is not a thing we do, and I've heard that even from OTs too, is that this is not a thing we do, even though we have a much easier time articulating self-feeding goals, bringing spoon to mouth. We can do those in schools without much difficulty. But there is a cultural kind of habit in school districts, across states, of where they draw this line. And I think that when you think about feeding being just medical, that really is a specific perspective that hasn't held up in court systems around disability law.
No, it hasn't. Yeah. Thank you for
Feeding,
saying that.
yeah. So when you go back to cases and things that have gone big suing cases, feeding has consistently been shown to be part of the child's school day and needs to be supported during the child's school day in a safe and inclusive way. So it doesn't, we're continue to make these assumptions about feeding that just aren't true and have been proven not true for decades now.
And that kind of brings me to you are actively working and looking at feeding policies in school districts. And so is it just so words matter for me. So I always say feeding and swallowing because they go hand in hand. You don't feed without swallowing. You don't swallow without feeding. So they really go hand in hand. So I'm always really careful. And Emily Homer, our spirit animal, she always says swallowing and feeding that way. I love that too. But to make sure that we get the word swallowing in there as well, so that everyone hears it. But I'm so fascinated about your work in policy and policy change in districts. Can you speak more to that? Because I'm like, tell me more.
Yeah, I'll totally give a little intro. So Margaryta and I are currently co-authoring a publication. We're in the middle of data collection right now. So keep your eyes peeled. We're doing a large scan of policies across all the states and trying to identify model states, some states that don't have publicly accessible policies. This is something that I think we as school feeding therapists and school SLPs and school OTs that don't think we have it in us to be feeding professionals, we need to know what our state is saying. And when our state doesn't say anything, we need to advocate for that. Because when our states don't have policies around, hey, it is the student's right to participate in lunch and to get what every other student receives, students are left behind. Students are put on modified day. Students are drinking 1 carton of milk for lunch, and that's all that they're offered. people are just making decisions based on the course of least resistance, which I completely get. But that's not how children should live their lives. And it's really doing a disservice to their entire educational journey if we continue to do the same old, because that's just how we want to do it. So yeah, I think the policy, to me, the policy piece makes things happen. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. When there are cases that cost school districts money, that makes change happen. When there are
Yes,
concrete
agreed.
policies that dedicate line items to how SLPs and OTs have to be compensated for doing these kinds of safe feeding plans, that is how we kind of change large scale systems to make sure that people like us, like everyone who's here today, who want to do this work, can do this work.
And well, and to just double down on that, should be doing this work.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
when we're looking at if we aren't doing this, the things you've already mentioned is that students are leaving midday or they're leaving before lunch so they can go eat at home. We're literally denying them a free and appropriate public education. We're telling them that we cannot keep them safe in school and therefore they're having to go home. It just drives me crazy. And when we talk about, I always kind of make things like I always go way over to an extreme. So it's just like, oh, because I was a kindergarten teacher, and oh, I taught them to read, so we can stop. They read their 50 sight words, high frequency words, and you stop. No, you don't stop. You keep going. Um, and you know what? I'm not going to get on that. I'm going to stick to you guys. You guys, I love what we do because this is so important. So I love Lily, the OT perspective. Margaryta, jump in
Yeah.
with the SLP clinician's perspective when you're working with districts that don't have policies or procedures yet.
Yeah. So, and I think I had to obviously scoop around and see what's available. And we do have some policies in New York City. We have this, I'm not sure if everyone uses a similar system, but we have a system where we bill our sessions. So we write what the session was in a
Mhm.
SOAP format. It's called CSIS for us. And within the CSIS, there is a button that says feeding and swallowing. So I'm very grateful that it
Okay.
exists, that already shows me that I should be and can address feeding and swallowing. I know that it is different for other districts and other states. And I just wanted to add on just a little bit about educational relevance, as Lily mentioned, with the potty training. And it's something that we do every day, and the kids are having a meal at least 3 times a day. And when are thinking about medical, allergies are also medical, but we have peanut-free schools. We have peanuts, right? We are addressing that. We have modified meals for people who do not eat pork or do not eat meat, right? We have to provide a different option for them. We're doing that. So again, when we are talking about a child who is unable to chew a pizza, and the pizza needs to be either presented in a different way, it needs to be modified, whether it's chopped or pureed, for my friend that I spoke about. I had to advocate for that in the lunchroom. I had to talk to the lunchroom staff and advocate, because sometimes even the staff are unaware what they should be doing. So I think when you think about that, you see how it is so academically relevant. Nutrition, safety, participation, eating like other kids is
Yes.
all academically relevant. And I think the reason why some of the schools and some of the districts have this big stigma against feeding therapy, and the word feeding therapy is, it
Mhm.
comes from a fear, and it
Yes.
comes from an old style of education. And I'm so glad that three of us are pushing We are pushing for you guys.
Yeah.
We are advocating and continuously to have conversations. We present at ASHA, we present at IOTA, we present at Feeding Matters. We are pushing to let you know that it can exist, it should exist within the schools. And we are giving you the tools to do it on top of that. That includes laws, that includes previous court cases that, you know, once you start about court cases, the school changes how it does things. Let me tell you. And I think we have to use those tools to slightly push the schools and administration and policies within our own districts and so forth.
Absolutely. And just to do one real quick, when you were talking about what cafeteria should do,
Yeah.
there is actually USDA regulation for
Yes.
every public school that is getting funded for the free and reduced lunch that gets funding. They are required, it is the regulation, they are required if they're getting extra funding for foods, that they must make accommodations and food modifications for students with special needs that are documented that need puree, minced and moist, soft and bite size. I love using ITSE. That's another talk, another day. When I was in Texas, I worked with my district. It was a huge district, very well funded. I just have to say this. I created the dysphagia menu that came directly in those three textures to the schools. I got to stop talking. That's another talk for another day. But this can happen, people. I'm now in Portland. I've only been here 2 years. It's a work in progress, but a work in progress, which brings me back to y'all because a lot of it has to do with training and effective staff training of all staff. I think maybe this question would actually go to both of you because I think we're stronger together when we are training and we're showing that it's not just one person. We're in this together. Oh,
Yeah. No, I agree. And just a quick note on the school oh my God, the schools the cafeteria,
oh,
Jesus,
yeah,
the cafeteria
yeah,
staff is when I did present that to her, to which she said, "So you want me to puree for one child?" And I said,
yeah.
"Yes."
Yes,
Yes. The answer
yes,
is yes.
full
I
stop.
want you to puree for one child. Yes. The
Yes.
answer is yes. So, but yes, the training starts a little bit with you. Some of the parts that you feel that you're not 100% confident. And I would start with laws and regulations that are our federal regulations that guide us. We have the tools. We just have to bring them up and forward. So that's easy, right? You could just read up on that. And of course, taking courses such as this one, continuously to learn, continuously to see what other school staff and providers are doing, and with a little bit of knowledge, even if it's a little bit that you guys learned from today, you bring it back to your school and you could teach others, you could teach paraprofessionals, you could teach teachers, you could teach about safe feeding, what it may look like, you could teach about participation during meal times, you could just teach about how it is academically relevant and have these small conversations to at least to have a little place in your school.
All
Yeah,
right.
I love that, Margarita. And I would say that my additional comment would be that none of us are experts in how this should go in every school and every district. And so we really have to mentor each other and be part of community collaboration in figuring out what's working for you, what's working for you, what's working for you. Because even the cafeteria staff thing, you know, there are states and there are school districts that say that those texture modifications have to be done in the cafeteria for sanitation reasons versus other schools and other states where the policies are different and you can do texture modifications, bite-sized modifications, mashing at tableside. Those are really important distinctions to know, and they vary heavily. And I think that when we're talking about like, what about itinerant or contract SLPs that don't
Mhm.
have relationships with cafeteria staff or principals and admin? We still in those roles, you still have to do feeding. This is still part
Yeah,
of the
it still
scope.
has to happen. Yes.
So there needs to be understanding of how do you do this if you only go to that school one day a week and don't have those relationships yet. And I think a lot of this is being mentored and providing mentorship with your own experiences through different groups.
Yeah.
And that is where I'll plug. We're at the Feeding Link. One of our big areas is a free community hub. So any working feeding person in SLP, OT, different professions that are working in the schools, please join our quarterly calls. And we're starting up a forum to learn from each other and just share
Love it.
experiences, share barriers, share how things have worked in our districts.
Yeah,
Before I forget, I'm going to
yes.
say I'm putting something in the link because we're putting our mouths where our mouths are, ladies and gentlemen. Here's our social media, and because I'm still in the Stone Age and analog, I put in my email. So we want to help you, and we mean it. So
And
there
if
you
any
go.
of you guys are joining ASHA this year,
Yes.
we are doing for the first time ever, guys, this is history into making, okay? ASHA convention, we asked for a functional space to have a school feeding and swallowing, a little group. It is a little bit earlier. It's on Friday, November 20th from 7 to 8, but I promise you the
AM.
energy is going to be AM, 7 to 8 a.m. But I promise you, even that early, the energy is going to be very high because both Carolyn and I'll be there.
We're going
So
to be there.
if you want to meet us in person and have these conversations and learn from each other, we will be there. We would love to see all of you actually there if you are attending ASHA.
Yay. Thanks for
Yeah.
remembering to say that. Yes. Yay, yay, yay. All right. I do want to, I know we've got there's so much to talk about. And what we haven't talked about is, I know I'm looking at the time, but I think we can do it. I do kind of want to know, how do we balance everything? If we're looking at balancing, we have to balance safety with independence. We have to balance dignity. Well, no, we don't have to balance dignity. We need to give dignity. But how do we balance autonomy and maybe independence? How to balance all of that with inclusion and communication? I mean, all of it. Oh, yay.
That's
How
a
do we
great
do,
question. I
how do we
mean,
do that, ladies?
feeding provides a lot of communication support. So I'm just going to say that doesn't need to be even discussed. If the child uses an AAC, have the options for the child to say no, yes, maybe, I like it, I don't like it, yucky, yummy, whatever the
Mhm.
level of this child. But in regards to how do you do it and how do you balance it, I feel like we as speech therapists and occupational therapists and school-based providers, we are very good actually at providing prompts and taking the prompts away and trialing, and that's how you do
Yeah.
it. You slowly trial, you give a prompt, you take away prompt, you pause, you give a child their own way of doing things, and if we can provide them with support, an adaptation where they could be more independent, then that's what we're going to do. So if the child needs an adapted spoon, and then with that spoon he's independent, then we're going to give him that spoon. Lily?
Yeah, I would say it's a nuanced answer, and we have to be
Mhm.
okay with living in that gray space. And it is not a black and white decision. Otherwise, every single kid would be on a G tube. You know, like if we wanted to go the extremes,
Yeah.
that is the extreme. We're not doing that. We're looking at independence and autonomy and safety and
Mhm.
participation.
And
And what I
sensory.
want to, there's
Uh,
so much. So to me, I just really want to kind of reaffirm that every day, every meal is a different day and a different meal. And kids might need different things through those days and different meals too. So feeding is not a linear path. You know, I think of my own eating as a child and into adult. I've had times where I've eaten at weird times. I've eaten a million snacks. I've had really regular meals. Life is a whole complex relationship with food. So we have to bend with that, with the child as they develop skills, as skills change, as preferences change, as kids become more confident in their communication to say yes or no. their feeding will look different. As they become more worn out by different motor skill development and have different big cognitive leaps, their feeding will look different. So we have to be okay with creating an environment where we can ask those constant questions, be in relationship with the child, be in relationship with the family and the teachers as well, because we're all going to have very different perspectives of how to navigate this.
Yeah, I find that really I do a training with all the paraprofessionals at the beginning of every year, and I just do a general talk about pediatric feeding disorder, and I call it dining with dignity and making meal times meaningful. And it's not, it's just kind of global, opens it up, just talks about it all, and it invites the conversation. Yeah, Margaryta.
Yeah, I think you said it really nicely, and I think it's the first step is also the passion inside of you. If you are here today, that means there is passion that lives inside of you. That's the beginning, and then you go from there. And I think that is a big step because we really need more school-based providers that have that passion on just trying to do something new that school hasn't done before. Let's see if you're part of that type of a school. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'd love to help get you started if you have any more questions for sure.
Yes.
That's really what we're here about. And did we touch on everything? I just feel like, oh my goodness, I know we need to kind of start wrapping it up, but you know what? Maybe
Yeah.
what I should say is I think we have a lot more to talk about, is what I really should have said. I should have said, did we cover? No, we didn't. Let me start again. I know we did not cover everything. So I know that I would love to have the two of you back on because I know there's a lot more we can talk about. Do you still have your article right there? Because I was so excited to show your article. Whoop,
I'm
whoop.
right here, guys.
Yeah.
Yes, right here. I got a physical copy, which was really hard to get because this was from OT practice. Okay, I'm not an OT. I asked all my OTs. Nobody could have got it. I also tried to bribe some OTs on Facebook groups, but Lily graciously has
I got
shipped
it,
this
and
to me.
I kept it for like 3 months because I was too lazy to go to the post
That's okay.
office.
I
So
forgive
and
you.
I
So
had it the
we
whole time.
wrote,
So we've got collaboration, y'all. It's not just an
yes.
SLP thing. It's not just an OT thing. We are
Yeah.
all in this together.
Yeah.
All right,
Yep,
Margaryta,
OT practice just
right?
Yes.
published us.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so
Yes.
much for
Thank
coming
you,
today.
everyone.
I mean, now, Margaryta, come on. I mean, I love the chance to talk feeding and swallowing with you. We've done a ton of work together, and somehow we never stop. Um, there's just so much more to talk about. And I know that we have already talked about doing some other master classes. We've done a master class on intervention, a master class on assessment, and we were just talking about doing maybe a master class on putting together the dysphagia team for those districts that don't have it. So we're putting it out there. I'm saying it now, so we have to do it. So those of you listening, if you don't see it soon, you better reach out and say, where is that? We need to do that. And then we're also talking about doing a master class, what you didn't learn in grad school about pediatric feeding disorder and dysphagia. So listen, listeners, listen for take a look. What am I trying to say? Keep your eye out. That's what I'm trying to say. Lily, I love that you're my neighbor. Literally, we're gonna have coffee because we live like streets away. And I love that you're an OT and your research and your perspective within this conversation just really lifts my heart. I love that we're all three really on the same page, and I know the listeners are as well. It's all about a whole student. Safety matters. Communication matters. Independence matters. Dignity is my big thing, and yours as well. Inclusion, belonging. I mean, I could keep going. Oh, I just give myself goosebumps again because I get so excited about this. All right, listeners, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks for doing this work that every day in the schools. If you liked this episode and if it resonated with you, how about you share it with your fellow SLPs and OTs administrators, teachers, anyone else who needs a reminder that school meal times are really more than just lunch. All right, don't forget, live listeners, you can earn, all listeners, you can earn 0.1 ASHA CEUs by completing the course modules inside your Speech Therapy PD account. And all of you with us live today, thank you, and go to your speech therapy account right now because learning matters and I want it to count.